about gratitude and civil society and stewardship. So ways of applying and living out gratitude in our lives, in the spaces in which we dwell. So who wants to start? Rachel?
Okay.
All right, Rachel will begin. And
I did not print this out this time. It'd be great if someone would talk about technology as not like a separation of using the phone as a, yeah. So anyway, but before I give some thoughts on care for the other, stewardship of the person, I wanted to give some quick notes on care itself. The etymology of the word care finds roots in the same words as grief, which is really interesting, that there is this great rejoicing in care, but there's also some sorrow in care. And we would hope that at some point, in beatitude, there's no need for care because we are just in this space of complete self-gift. But this week we continue to talk about the goodness of our existence, and that care carries that same refrain. Caring for one another affirms their existence. Simultaneously, it results in care for oneself. As I care for you, I am also caring for myself. As I'm giving of myself through care of the other, my self-gift becomes self-realization. And we find ourselves by making a sincere gift of self. And in another way, authentic care is essentially nuptial as an act of gratitude. It is interpersonal and free. And in the thought of nuptiality, the giving and receiving must be fruitful. Now, that fruitfulness, I know, can take on many different meanings. Sometimes it's something that you see exteriorly, but sometimes it's something that you don't get to see. Sometimes in this life, something you may not see. The caregiver at the bedside table may not see the fruitfulness of their care, but it is still there in a mysterious way for the one receiving the care. Caring for a child results in the fruitfulness of their growth and their maturation, something we can also often see and experience with them. But we also hope in the same notion of the nuptiality of care, that the receiver will fully participate with the giving and the receiving of care, like a gratitude and a justice, like paying for a child to go to college and seeing that the child takes their experiences from that to inform their life and their decisions for their vocations, etc. And this participation in the gift leads to healing, affirmation of the good, and inevitably gratitude. Now, I wanted to quickly talk a little bit about civilization, especially in the reflections from John Paul II's letter to families. Because in that letter, he says that the family is the first and most basic expression of man's social nature. And that the communion that you find between the spouse, the husband and the wife, and then leads to community, and that community is then the cell of society. And so these shared promises of love, fidelity, honor, permanence unto death, they also extend into their children and then into the world. And I think that we see that. You see when those kind of vows that we have to one another, just as human persons, to honor one another, to then live from cradle to grave, to be able to practice those things, that when they're harmed, we see how society then also suffers in that way. And so we really are hoping for a humanization of the world with these thoughts of a civilization of love that I'm sure that we're going to talk about as we continue unfolding our thoughts on a civil society and stewardship.
Great. Thank you. I do have some thoughts on that. We'll hear from Mark as well and kind of set up the context here.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about how gratitude intersects with stewardship for the natural world, for our natural environment. And just a few sort of scattered thoughts here. We talked this morning about liturgy and the sorts of attitudes towards the world that liturgy inculcates in us, and the way in which through liturgy and through the encounter with value through liturgy, we are drawn out of ourselves by what is in some respect greater than ourselves. And many writers throughout the tradition sort of use, and especially in recent writings, sort of use liturgical themes, liturgical images to talk about the natural world. The whole world, in a sense, is a vast cosmic liturgy, right? Praising God. This morning in my remarks, I talked about how Hildebrand describes quite strikingly how we can see festivity present in the natural world. You can, as it were, train yourself to see the trees, the mountains, the sky, the starry skies praising God. right? There's something of festivity already present there in the non-human world. And an awareness of that, I think, calls us to a sort of reciprocation, right? We come to be grateful for the natural world and the way it displays this liturgical quality. And that should move us to gratitude to God for it, gratitude for our own place in the natural world. And also, and here I want to sort of push back on some of the things I said this morning, actually. There's a sense in which we can be grateful, I think, to the natural world. It's not exactly gratitude, right? Like full gratitude in the proper sense is towards persons. But there's a sense in which I can have this kind of stance of care, like you're talking about, Rachel, towards the natural world, in which I am, in some sense, grateful to the plants, grateful to the animals, grateful to the natural world for giving themselves to me. Mm-hmm. There's something analogous, not exactly the same, but analogous to agency there that calls us to a response of gratitude and a response of care. So I think if we have this sort of global liturgical attitude, that is a liturgical attitude towards all aspects of our life, it's going to lead us to want to safeguard the environment around us, to do things like spending time in nature, or planting a garden, or whatever property you have, whether that's an apartment balcony or many acres, to care for them, to ensure that the plants, the animals, the inorganic elements of your environment are beautiful, are able to display this festive and liturgical quality. So there's a sort of reciprocity there, something like the kind of reciprocity of care that we have when we're grateful for our children and civilization. Let me just close these opening remarks here with a quotation, I think, that sums this up well. This is from Pope Francis's Laudato Si, paragraph 11. He says, St. Francis of Assisi helps us to see that an integral ecology calls for openness to categories which transcend the language of mathematics and biology and take us to the heart of what it is to be human. That's that humanizing of the world, but it extends beyond the human world. Just as happens when we fall in love with someone, whenever St. Francis of Assisi would gaze at the sun, the moon, or the smallest of animals, he burst into song, drawing all other creatures into his praise. And that's, I think, the stance of festivity that gratitude for and to the natural environment leads us.
I have to say, one of the things that I love about Franciscan is that I've never heard birds sing as much as they do here. Like, it's alarming in a really beautiful way. Like, I'm laying in bed and I hear the birds and I'm thinking, is it 7 o'clock in the morning? That's what time they wake up in Florida. I don't know. I need someone to ask. Yeah.
Well, a question, for both of you in different ways. Both of you were talking about sources of gratitude, like in nature and family in response to care. And I've talked a little bit, throughout the day with both of you about this, but how ought we think about the many cases in which those things are not there, they're absent, they're broken, they're wounded, you live in an ugly place, you come from a bad family.
Right.
It's easy for us to say these things, and we ought to, right? But many people, either through their own choice, perhaps, just because they live this cramped, where's Dan, this cramped, sunken sort of life, they don't see these things, or again, they're really taken from them. I would assume that limits their capacity in some way for gratitude, but when we talk about how we ought to care, right, what are some ways that we can do that?
So, I think we spoke a little bit, and I think I talked a little bit about it when we talked about suffering the other day, that there's this notion of suffering, that unless suffering in some ways is then redeemed and somehow returned to gratitude, not necessarily in the moment, because there are moments that the suffering is not meant to be met with thankfulness, but maybe afterwards, then that suffering has the ability to then be transformed and not transferred anymore. Because I think often what we see in maybe the emptiness of a caregiver is because their suffering is no longer transformed, it becomes transferred. And we see it even when we are in, let's say, bad moods. You're in a bad mood and you're not giving yourself the ontological space to get out of that, then you transfer it to other people. I know I see it in my own household, maybe not in other people's households, but where you walk in, you think that you're in a great mood, and then you just kind of dissipate that to everyone else. And so I think that it's the same way in care, that often when we think that we're caring for someone else, that they are also caring for us. And that the humanization that we share, that we think that we are sharing with them, they are likewise sharing it with us. And in a perfect world, it would be something that we would experience from our families, that we would be able to experience that kind of self-gift and that kind of love and humanization within the walls of our household. Sometimes that's not, but we don't limit the gratuity of God, that he does not provide it to us in other ways.
Yeah, I think that's right on. Going along with that, I'm not always going to get care reciprocated back to me. But if I have this experience of gratitude, of being sort of drawn out of myself by the festivity of the world, hopefully that will lead me to model that more and more. So I'm just thinking about some of these cases of, say, people who live, even some students of mine who live, say, in the inner city, and they don't have access to beautiful places.
You think there are many people who have never seen the dark, which
Right.
means they've never really seen stars, right?
Right.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, and that's very common, right?
Yes.
I mean, I remember I saw a Bible study once at a coffee shop in Austin where they had all these, the guy who was leading it brought all these different lamps and stuff, and they were like trying to create this darkness so they could like see what a light and dark looked like. And I was like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, we're reading John. I'm like, all right, okay, and tell me more. But this is what he was trying to show them, right?
So I think that's a great example. We can find ways to model for others, or provide them access to whatever little bit of beauty and gratuity and festivity is available in their area. This is why I love Pope Francis' idea of the integral ecology. Right? It's not just care for the natural environment; it's care for the environment in all respects. Right? And if I live in an awful tenement in the inner city, that's my environment, and there are good things there.
Right.
They might be hard to find, but there are good things there. There's a building there that needs to be cared for. There's spaces around the building that need to be cared for. And we can model for other people that attitude of gratitude and care for whatever environment we have.
Great.
I mean, this is in part why I make my students go outside, right? And some of them just go out on the quad and they look at the grass. But that's something. That's part of one's environment that requires care.
Would this, do you think, lead to a response, a preference perhaps, of rebuilding as opposed to building anew? Because if you have gratitude even for the dilapidated spaces, then you owe some care to that environment.
I would say so, yeah. Yeah, as we've been having this conversation here, I don't think Bill Tullius is here right now, but he asked about the Heideggerian idea of framing, right? So Rachel, you were talking about technology and the way that technology, puts a frame around things,
right,
and limits our vision of things. And one's rundown built environment can also put a frame around things, right? But frames can be beautiful,
right?
And frames are something you can attend to, and so even these sorts of environments, rebuilding them, recrafting them, making them better. I think go a long way.
The other thing, too, that I think, first to preface all of this, I've been doing a really good job this week of not openly crying. It's probably going to go all to heck with this last panel, so just a preference. If I start crying, I'm fine. But this is
You
a
cry,
response. I cry all the time. I sat in the back with Fidelio, so no one could see me sobbing. But the truth is that the other thing, we have to understand that there's a subjectivity to beauty and to someone's understanding of what is good in their world. For me, I think a lot of people don't think about the fact that maybe they've never been exposed to this type of beauty, but they still experience that beauty in their world. Just an anecdotal thing, I remember going on a mission trip and really kind of bonding with this young woman in the inner city. And on the way, when I was leaving, she brought to me a trash bag. And she said, I wanted to bring you everything I have. See, I told you. I wanted to bring you everything that I have because you've given me everything you have. And I think a lot of us just don't understand that that's a moment that suffering has been redeemed for them. that the thing that maybe I don't consider beautiful, they've considered it beautiful. And so for when we really understand what personalism then gives to the world, it's going to be an understanding of this person being unrepeatable in all of their experiences, but it's still elevating them to some good, and that good being God.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah, and that there is that subjectivity to beauty, and that each person can, in very unexpected ways, reveal beauty to us that we couldn't have seen previously, like out of their brokenness. I had a very interesting student this last semester in my philosophy of art and beauty class, and he brought in this song by, I guess it goes as Ye now, Kanye West.
Oh, yeah.
So this song, Runaway, which had, frankly, offensive lyrics, but whatever. But there was a beauty there that he enabled me to see. And he, coming out of a broken home and some very difficult life circumstances, was able to show me beauty in a place, in a song I would have never listened to voluntarily on my own, and enabled me to see a beauty in him that I wouldn't have seen otherwise, right? So there's that sort of reciprocity.
Yes.
Right? Like, I gave him some categories to talk about beauty with, and he gave me a vision of beauty that I would not have ever received.
Which was
before.
Out of his suffering. So
Right.
you wouldn't even think that out of your suffering is going to come this immense beauty. But I think when that suffering is shared, especially in ways that are very unexpected, you're able to then see how God is piecing all of these things together to an objective beauty.
I love the direction that this is going. Can we extend it to like civil society, to local governments, educational institutions? Like, how do we apply some of these things? I'm thinking, for instance, like in Eleanor Stump's talk, right? We got the idea that what you really owe in gratitude is everything, right? And everything to everyone, right? And I mean, this, what you're saying about this person giving everything reminds me of this. Like, how ought that affect the way we live, right? The way that we carry on our day-to-day lives, right?
Why are you looking at me? Look at Mark.
Okay, Mark.
I mean, I think, so again, I'm a metaphysician, so I sort of start theoretical and conceptual. But I think that like metaphysical categories and metaphysical ideas ought to inform our perception. That is, they ought to transform the way we look at the world. And so I think this idea, there's a line from Brothers Karamazov, right? Everyone is responsible for everyone else, and I more than anyone else. That there's something deeply right, maybe not taken exactly literally, but there's something deeply right about that intuition that ought to inform our perception.
But when we think of like stewardship.
So that such that we begin to, then look for, like, where are there places very concretely, right, in my yard, in my neighborhood, among the people immediately present to me. Like, we have a pretty bad homelessness problem in the Twin Cities. And there are concrete ways that it's very easy for me to serve, right, to care for people. I'm like, just finding those. Where are there those opportunities where I can do small things concretely to show my gratitude for living in this city and living in this country, living in this world.
And that would look, I presume, different than were those manifestations not of gratitude but of justice. Right? I mean, when we think of our care for the environment, our care for the other, it's one thing when we say we have this obligation of justice. It's a different thing when we say we have an obligation of gratitude. Right? I don't know how that's lived out really, but I mean, it certainly is a different motivation, I think.
I think that's a key place to start, is what is your motivation? How are you perceiving the world? And yeah, I could perceive it as, everyone, I mean, I do think that everyone has a right to, say, adequate food and healthcare and
Housing,
basic necessities of life, housing and so forth. And I think we as a civil society, all of us together, have an obligation in justice to ensure that everybody has those things. Nevertheless, that might not be the best motivation for getting people those things. A motivation of gratitude might actually be much more effective.
I'm reminded of a distinction Alice von Hildebrand liked to make between civilization and culture, right? Maybe you tell me what you think. This is a fair comparison to say that justice might get us civilization, but gratitude will get us culture, right? It has to go farther. We just get the bare minimum. So when we think about caring for people, their basic needs being met, okay, but that might be a response of justice. But if we're looking motivated by gratitude, that isn't really enough.
It's not. And what really comes down to is you can't say, well, this person needs shelter, let me put a roof over their head. Because then you have to then help them to understand why they need shelter, why you would provide that for them. And so there has to be kind of an opening of dialogue to really get to the core of the question. And the question is, how do we care for the person in a way that then makes society and civilization more geared towards stewardship of the other? That quote from Brother K, I'm going to say it wrong. That quote.
People just say Brothers K.
Brothers K. That's what the cool people say. Thank you. Brothers K. It reminds me of a quote from Mother Teresa, which says that we've just forgotten that we belong to one another. We've forgotten that we belong to one another. And instead of being very kind of pithy in the way that you practice charity or you practice justice, it should always be interpersonal in that way. There's a big difference between writing a check and carrying the burden.
Right. I don't remember who told me this, but I was very convinced by it. The real problem with welfare checks is that they're checks, and that they come in the mail or direct deposit, that they come from some anonymous thing, not a person. Right? It would be, how different would that be, right? If we really took our obligations and gratitude seriously and didn't just sort of, find a way to outsource it. But
and that's not really
personal.
It's not a humanization of the person.
Yeah, so
if I write you a check,
takeover of the IRS. But there are more personal ways to do these things.
Right. And I think when you look at something like welfare, not to turn this into that kind of discussion, but
it's
when
part of civil society,
it is. But when
it's on the title,
when the check is being written, then there's actually a dehumanization that happens to the person that feels like this is the only way that I can survive, is from this inhumane check that's not attached to any other person. And so for us to then practice that kind of care, it does have to be interpersonal. It has to be free. It has to lead back to me saying that it's good that you exist. And a welfare check doesn't seem to have that same connotation.
Yeah, it's more like it would be bad if you died, but that's not. So we'll try to avoid that, right? But that's very different than it's good that you're here.
Yes.
Right? And when we do the minimum to maintain, and I think we often look at stewardship like that, let's just kind of do the minimum. And I guess that's the theme I keep returning to, at least when I rethink about these things from a perspective of gratitude. It's always takes me farther. But,
and it's not just me caring for some person. It's us together. I think that's an important thing. So it's not just the community I have with those who are in need, but I with my friends, right, bringing those who are in need into that circle of friends, right? Or I with my friends, with my family, caring for the built environment or for the natural environment in a particular place. So there's sort of that level of unification as well. That's, I think, the misleading thing about the Brothers K quote, that everyone's responsible for everyone else and I more than anyone else. Sure, I need to take that responsibility to heart, but I'm not alone. Right? It's we together.
Yeah, every I is more than everyone else. Right.
I mean, and all those I's are together.
To the depth of myself, and you to the depth of yourself. So,
yes.
I know you have some more notes there. I want to make sure did you want to get to those as well?
No.
Okay.
This is pretty fruitful, I think.
Yeah. Good. Well, I mean, we can open it up to audience questions if y'all.
Are there people here?
It's hard to see with the lights, but yeah.
Is there a microphone?
There is a microphone. Maybe Amanda will help us out, and maybe Amanda can bring the microphone around. That would be lovely. Thanks, Amanda. I know. Turn it on, please. Hold the button down. There's just one. It's on the side.
Got it.
Just trying to help.
I'm Natalie. So we were talking at some point today about how little maternity has come up in a conversation about gratitude. And so, Rachel,
Man, it seems like a great
as
thing
a
to
mother,
talk about. Yeah.
and a person
Cry again.
to probably of other people, can you just kind of lean in and share with us a little bit more about the specific nature of how gratitude manifests in your motherhood? You alluded to it a little bit at the beginning of your comments, but if you could just share a little more with us.
Sure. I do think there is something really, really unique about the female person, bodily and within their own feminine genius and heart, that happens when we practice gratitude. And I think that, like within my womb, there is a beautiful passivity, but also an act of gratitude that happens with each of my children. And so we actually, gosh, I swear, I'm not going to cry continuously through this talk. It's fine. So we have 6 children, and then we also have a child that we lost. And that child was actually right after the Hildebrand Project Seminar a few years ago. And we named him Carol Dietrich, after John Paul II, and of course Dietrich von Hildebrand. And what was really beautiful was that even in that moment of carrying these children in my womb, there is this passive receptivity, but also an active, gratuitous nature to then carrying this child. And so it's really beautiful when you think about what the act of gratitude has to take. It has to take you being able to say, I'm going to actively give, but I also have to passively allow them to receive, to become whole. And so that happens within the womb of the mother. But then the other thing that happens through maternity, and I think through a lot of the feminine genius, which I think Greg touched on it a little bit yesterday, that it's not something that is not shared by men, but it is something that I think is especially gifted towards women, is this ability to then receive and invite other people into that reception. That's why I think we refer to the church as feminine, that there's something that happens within the womb of the church that is then given to the world and initiates this kind of give and exchange between the bridegroom and the groom, the bridegroom and the bride. And then this ability to then initiate this life, to welcome life, we then invite the rest of the body of Christ into that. And I think that in a very practical way, within my motherhood, I invite my husband into his fatherhood by practicing my motherhood. And that's something that John Paul II actually says, that the husband does not know that he is a father until the mother tells him that he is a father. We've got that initial, we've got a couple more lines on this test than we did. Not the COVID test, I'm talking about pregnancy tests, but there's an extra line in here. It's the same response, by the way. The COVID test, you're like, maybe if I drink more water. It's the same thing with the pregnancy test sometimes. And so
I'm really glad we got that and Kanye in this panel.
You're welcome. There's supposed to be intimate conversations. So, but there's this initiation, reception, and then gift of life that happens. And I think that within my motherhood, I've been given the privilege of being able to see that happen around me, not just through my personal motherhood and my physical motherhood, but in my spiritual motherhood as well. You guys want to talk about maternity, or are you okay?
Not on camera.
Hi, my name's Bridget. I was just wondering, because it seems that it's been talked about a lot, how the personalist approach to charity and to helping people has to be not necessarily one-on-one, but certainly face-to-face. And I'm kind of worried and wondering, what does that mean as far as giving to charities and stuff? Does personalism excuse people from not donating to, causes across the country or across the world or whatever? And what does that even look like to a personalist if you're, you want to help everyone in the world, but you're not face-to-face with them?
Yeah, I would say it does not excuse you from doing that, and it doesn't excuse you from paying your taxes and so forth, but it sort of adds it adds a layer of responsibility over and above doing those things. So in my talk this morning, I was talking about the relationship between justice and mercy, justice and gift giving, justice and gratitude. And when you come to see the world as constituted by gift, it doesn't take away the obligations of justice, but it sort of refounds them on that foundation of gratuity and gratitude and mercy. And so I need to ensure that goods are distributed fairly. Goods are distributed justly. I need to support programs and charities and so forth that do this, but also try to make them personalistic, where they're not just writing a check, right? Like, people need a check sometimes, but I need to do whatever I can, generally in my local community, but whatever I can with the charities I'm working with and whatever influence I have on wider civil society to try to bring that face-to-face encounter into charities or the welfare system or homeless shelters or whatever it might be, so that there is that element.
Yeah, you don't get less responsibility. You get more. But your remarks here and something both of you were saying earlier reminds me of a passage I wanted to ask you about after your talk this morning. Excuse me. This is in Baldwin Schwartz's essay on gratitude. He talks about what he calls the paradox of gift giving. And you mentioned that, a lot of people have said that we're grateful for things because they're more than we deserve, right? And there's this aspect of gratuitousness and excess. I spoke about the same thing. But what Schwartz points out is that that's from the perspective of the person who receives the gift. From the perspective of the person who gives the gift, you know that they are worth all of that, right? And even more. And that you couldn't give enough, right? This response of gratitude and of love, again, following from Stump's talk, we know that there's no real limit to what we ought to give, especially in love. And so then the person who receives has this desire to repay, also infinite, right? And so you just keep cycling upwards, sort of, right? There's never really a bound. And we've focused a lot on this gratuitousness, but I think we have not focused so much on the perspective. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do in the more practical conversation here on the person who's giving the gift initially. Like, that it is more, that the person deserves more than you're even able to give, right?
Yes, absolutely. And this example of the woman who wants to give you everything because you gave her everything, I think that illustrates that so beautifully, that there is this sort of heightening, ever greater excess, ever greater infinitude. And
it's this crescendo of love and charity.
Yeah, and gratuity and beauty and all of these things are not just sort of stable properties in things, they're relational properties. Hildebrand talks about them as messages to others, right? And so I see the face of the other person, and the phenomenologist Emmanuel Levinas describes how when you really look at the eyes of another person, they call you to a sort of infinite charity, right? Like, I have already done too little, right? I could have done more had I arrived a moment sooner, like, to care for you. And so there's this sort of infinitude that calls me to this infinite service, but then the other person, hopefully, sees that in my eyes and feels called to infinite service, and there's this sort of ever-heightening more and more and more.
It reminds me of that the fact that good is diffusive of itself. So it's never going to be inward, but it always is overwhelming. It's always kenotic in that way.
Okay. More questions, Amanda?
Hi, Peter Burley again. I'm thinking about the Brothers K, and I listened to an interview once where this Russian was expressing that hysterical women in Russian literature express some kind of almost pre-civilized honesty, where they're sort of saying things that in polite company we may not ordinarily do. And in that same scene with the elder Zosimov, and people are meeting him, and a woman comes up and says, I love humanity, but I hate people. I love the idea of humanity when it's real general, and I'd be willing to die for anyone, but then I find people insufferable within 24 hours, and the way they scratch their pen annoys me, and the way they chew annoys me. I've always found that very good, because she's very honest and she's trying to express a problem. But how would a personalist respond to that? What would you say to that?
Well, I think it's sort of what Mark was saying a moment ago, that it's I mean, yeah, we have these abstract obligations, but it's always really to people. Gratitude is to people. I'm very sympathetic with that passage. I don't know what it means to love humanity, but I know what it means to love lots of individual humans. The abstractions they have their place, but we should not confuse them. I'm sure Mark probably has more to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a danger of this exercise that we're all going through this week here. I mean, a lot of very lofty things have been said by a lot of people about gratitude this week. But to some extent, it's all abstract, right, here. I mean, we're having personal relationships and friendships with one another, and a lot of gratitude has been concretely expressed here. But there's a danger of the lofty sentiments remaining lofty sentiments, right? And if we've seen the beauty of the lofty sentiments, we should see what all beauty says to us, which is you must change your life. And that means concretely change your life, like do something different for some other concrete person after you leave the seminar. Right? And I say you, but I'm saying that to me too.
No, I agree. I don't have anything to add to that. It's brilliant. Thank you.
Hi, Samuel. So my question is going to invoke another lofty concept that hopefully will give us a doorway into some practical instances. But as we talk about civil society and our relationships with each other, I wonder if something we haven't talked about, providence, can give us a formula, an order to consider how the things that that we could be grateful for present themselves to us, and the way that we can trust the path that we're on, the things that come to us are the things that we get to receive, and not go searching out for things to be activists for, but be grateful caregivers. That does make sense.
Yes.
Actually, could you ask that again in a different way, maybe? So you're talking about providence and a way that we could then practice trust with gratitude for the things that maybe we do not yet have, or
gratitude for the things that are already in our life, and that be the opportunity to care for the people in our community, in our society. I think there's a lot of, when we think about the structure of society, we're like, there's so many problems out there, but maybe there's some way to, some way that metaphysics brings us close to home.
So I think this is addressing jellybeeism, a term some of you may know from Bleak House. And there's a character, Anna knows it, character, Miss Jellybee, who is very busy with all of the sort of societies for, the poor and people all over the world, and she's hustling about and has this whole busy enterprise in her home while her own children are just totally neglected, right? Mm-hmm. But she's such a virtuous lady, Miss Jellybee, So I thought that's one of the finer descriptions of that sort of problem, right?
And I think that honestly is a form of acedia, kedia, chedia. That you have an indifference
Buffalo,
to that
buffalo,
which
buffalo,
yes,
yeah,
buffalo. That you have an indifference towards the what's imminent to you, and instead are looking so far out that you don't see that. Another example of that would be when you get out of Mass where you've practiced such gratitude, and it immediately leaves when the person cuts you off in the parking lot, right? So we have to be able to practice gratitude imminently so that we can practice it distantly.
And I really like the way you put that in terms of providence, that like God has placed like right here in my concrete life, right, people to care for, right? And I don't have to go looking for them. Like I have a house, I have a neighborhood, right? I have a place where I work, I have a city that have definite concrete people in them, and they are given to me as gifts to care for.
And I think there's also like a fragmentation that happens to the person when you try to get out of your local responsibilities in order to practice some sort of distant missionary responsibility. You see that everywhere, where someone has been going off and they've been doing all of these great things, but no one eminently knows them. And I think there's a fragmentation of their identity, a fragmentation of what they're giving to the world that then happens. And so you have to have that kind of self-care eminently for self-realization to then impact the rest of your life.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Alexi, and I had a question regarding how we can enact positive, lasting change out of gratitude when gratitude is a value response, and that leaves two questions with that. And so if gratitude is a value response, then it's not consistent or reliable with fallen tendencies to leave everything to gratitude. So this brings back the relationship between gratitude and justice. And then a phenomenon we see with founders who are touched by grace in such a way that they start a movement out of gratitude, but then the torchbearers have never connected in the same way, but they still have an obligation to continue the mission. And that's in the history of Western society and culture. So, comment on that.
Do you ever, I wouldn't mind, could you get a little bit more concrete? It sounds like you have an example in mind. Do you?
Oh, very specific.
Very explicit. Stand up and be very explicit.
Very explicit. Well, for example, in the business world, there's multiple small businesses that start with a great mission, a great charity that they want to enact all this positive change, do a lot of this missionary work, and then it just falls a generation later. They retire and it falls. So I'm wondering how, with the fallen tendencies of man, how when we're leaving everything to a value response with gratitude, then that's leaving it to the subjective to respond, and how instead of out of justice. So I'm just curious about that relationship more.
Well, I think we're not anti-justice here. I don't think.
No.
But, yeah. We're not saying scrap it and replace it with gratitude. Still justice. Yeah. But I'll make that qualification and turn it to y'all.
So I mean, I think like in the order of justice, you want to set up a corporation, right? A lasting entity, right? A juridical person that's going to continue the whatever mission it is you have in mind, right? So I've got this mission. I found this entity, and then others can come work for it. And I don't need to leave it up to my followers being grateful to me to continue on my work because I've created, like the Hildebrand Project, which presumably will outlast, us, hopefully. Right, so the founders have created that's a sort of structure of justice. We would say a sort of legal entity that continues it. Nevertheless, it seems to me, for the personalist, that's not going to be a substitute for doing things out of gratitude. It's true, gratitude is in some sense subjective in the sense that it's a movement of subjectivity, but that's where the perfection of persons comes about. And so it seems like, it's one of these cases of it's too bad in a sense we have to leave it up to subjectivity, but like what else have you got? Like that's where the real movement of love and the real development of personality and so forth comes about. And so we have to leave it to that.
Thank you, Rob Reed. My question is, so we're talking about civil society in 2023. How would you distinguish the ethos of generosity and gratitude from sort of a counterfeit, very similar ethos that probably governs many of our cities and affords many privileges to people on the margins, addicts, criminals, but doesn't impose any demands or accountability to the public good?
Where is Derek Jeffries?
That's what I was about to say. Right.
I don't know. I mean, if I at least can really answer that adequately. But what I can say is, that in the personal encounter, the demand is the personal encounter, right? That's really, if there's any demand, it's not one that you make. It's the value response that person would have to you. But more importantly, it's really the demand that person makes on you to care. And the demand would arise just out of that interpersonal love, and that's really where it would stay. That I think would be the limit of it. But that's.
Well, the other thing I would say too about those programs, which are good, is that they should be ran by people that practice the authentic care that's required for those programs. That the program can't be something that's just according to rubrics that someone put in place or a checklist that someone put in place, but the program has to be humanized, and it has to be interpersonal in that way, so that it's only through the interpersonal that there is a demand placed upon us. When that reverence is there, there's a demand to rise to that reverence.
Because it can be dehumanizing if done poorly. And that, there's this wonderful meditation in Anselm, I believe, on almsgiving and all the wrong ways to do it, right? And he gives this whole list, and he's like, don't do it when they're walking out of church. Don't do it when their kids are around. Don't do it in a way that would humiliate someone, right? Do it, if you're going to help, you have to really help in a way that actually respects the person and tries to lift them up, and not just checks the box for yourself or for the civil society obligations or whatnot. It has to have this personal aspect to it. So Anselm's sort of a proto-personalist in that regard.
And provides them with that witness that can enable that sort of upward movement, that crescendo, right? That can give them an opportunity to not just have a sort of propositional demand placed upon them, like you need to get sober or something like that, or they can really experience the possibility of a better life through their encounter with you.
Because if it's a relationship of gratitude and love, and gift giving is motivated by love, you don't demand the response to the gift, but you can hope it. Right? You can hope for the response, and then again you have this crescendo moment. So I think that's all you can do and all you ought to do.
And it gives them that, Rachel, you talked about the ontological space, right, for a response, but you're giving them that space that maybe they've never had before, whereby they can rise to that.
Hello, my name is Will McCauley. I'm just going to read straight from here because I don't really have it in my head too well. But we often hear a lot nowadays about burnout, especially sympathy burnout, as a danger for people involved in both corporeal and spiritual charitable works. How do we square this with the call to give from the depths of ourselves and with the examples of the saints? I think of especially of like a Martin de Porres or a St. John Vianney or a Mother Teresa, and Jesus Christ, who truly emptied themselves out entirely for the poor and the glory of God.
Sure. There is one of my favorite passages is from the Song of Solomon, the Song of Songs, when after the beloved has found themselves, I found my beloved, I've wandered around for the beloved, and there's this point in chapter 4 when they asked him, well, where is your beloved? Well, my beloved has returned to feed among the lilies. And it's such an interesting denotion there because the lilies represent Christ. The lilies represent returning from the place in which you've come. And so for us to avoid burnout, you have to be feeding yourself with that which is eternal. And that's what happens. You can't take your work and your work be that which feeds you. Your work has to be a result of you being fed by something that is eternal and always returning back to God for it. If not, burnout is the inevitable place because your capacity is human unless you rely on something that is suprahuman, something that is supernatural, and that for us is the eternal, which is God.
And we encounter Christ, we return to Christ in the context of his body, the church. And the church is a group of friends. Right? That's what the church really is it's the friends of Christ, right? And because we are friends of Christ, we're friends of each other too. And when you do things with your friends, it's fun.
Right.
And so, this service is, in a sense, it's meant to be fun, right? It's meant to be enjoyable, right? Genuinely virtuous activity is enjoyable. And that requires that it be done out of those depths of contemplation and prayer together with each other.
Right.
That we are grateful together.
And within leisure, that was something that we talked a little bit about in our small group the other day, was that one of the things that happens when we don't take time for leisure is that there's then no recollection, there's no re-energizing. Within our faith, leisure truly is the liturgy. Leisure truly is returning to Mass and being able to find yourself within the place where freedom really is, which is within the liturgy. If you don't take time for leisure, there's no time for reorienting yourself to the good. And then for some reason, in a disordered way, your work becomes the good. And so an anecdotal example of that is, I can't remember if I shared it on a panel or if I shared it in a small group, but that like Lin-Manuel Miranda, when he was writing the music for Moana, hit a wall where he couldn't write anymore. And he couldn't come up with the final songs in it, but he stopped and he went and played with his daughter and then was able to write the songs that finished out the film. And so it was within that leisure. And for a lot of us, it's going to be within the leisure of your vocation. So my leisure as being a wife, a mother, and a child. And particularly in that order of being a child of God, being a spouse to my husband, and being a mother to my children, that you have to return back to that fundamental pattern of the person to be able to find yourself again. And so if I'm being a horrible spouse, he can tell me, go remember to be a child. I'll probably not accept that very well in that moment. But returning back to the lilies, returning back to the place where my wellspring comes from is what we have to do. And that's in leisure in its utmost understanding, which is within the arms of God.
It's precisely because of this problem and this point about leisure that I wanted to talk about the stewardship for the natural environment.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking personally, I find a great deal of leisure and a great deal of sort of regeneration by spending time in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm an avid hiker and camper and things like that. And sort of entering into nature, but not just as sort of a place for pure recreation in some sort of shallow sense, but really training myself to see the natural world as the cosmic liturgy.
Yes.
Right, that this is an extension of the Mass, or the Mass is an extension of it, but they're sort of a piece with one another. There is this sort of universal festivity that is there in the wilderness, in the natural world. Mm-hmm. That both provides me with the sort of way to stave off burnout, guard against burnout, and have that sort of that place of the lilies that I can return to, but then also gives me this other opportunity to practice care, mm-hmm. right, and to want to do things to safeguard that, supporting national parks and things like this. So there's the opportunity, like even in the midst of the liturgy, to practice gratitude and to practice care and so forth.
Yes, so good.
Hi, my name's Jolene, and I mean, I think we can all say that we've appreciated this whole week talking about personalism. When we end and go back to our lives, most of us are working in the secular world, not everyone is studying philosophy 24/7. How do we invite more people in the secular world and civil society to be more personable, to be personalists? How do we encourage this personalism in civil society if we haven't, done the Hildebrand Seminar?
Have you ever thought that maybe we do this because we don't know how to do that? But maybe my speakers here do know.
Well, one of the ways I think is for you to obviously practice personalism yourself. There's going to be a great deal that people will see just in your day-to-day life that is going to make them wonder why you see the world that you see. And there's actually a quote that hangs above our bed at home that says, "A man sees in the world what he carries in his heart." And for you to be able to then show people this same thing that you see in the world, which hopefully you carry in your heart, which is a care for the other person that goes deep into your philosophy, deep into your theology, deep into your understanding of who God is, then it changes everything around you. When something is that authentic, there is no chance that it won't change everything around you. It'll change the way you want to do business. It'll change the way that you want to raise a family, the places where you want to be in your leisure. It's going to change everything because this kind of philosophy, a philosophy of personalism, it does require you to change your life, as Mark was saying. You don't get to be a personalist and be a horrible person. And so you have to be a personalist in such a way that personalism makes the world more human.
Yeah, people will respond to, there may be programs, I think, in particular places, and like there might be things in a particular workplace that you really can do to foster more personal interactions and interpersonality, and treating people like people, right? I mean, taking from laborem exercens and like making sure that the work is dignified. I mean, so you really is the way that you live it out. But I think you're exactly right. People will respond to the care, right? And you have to be open to respond to those values, and create the space for others to do so as well if you're in such a position.
And a lot of people, I know, at least the secular people I encounter are my students for the most part, most of whom are just nothing religiously. They already have personalist intuitions, right? A lot of people, most people nowadays, have kernels of personalism in them. The worries about discrimination and racism and all these sorts of things that sort of animate modern civil society have a personalist direction to them. And I think it's sort of our job as personalists both to model living personalism, but also to help, sort of foster those seeds, right? To be a sort of mirror to them.
Why you care about this thing. Like
That's
your
right.
intuition is right, but there's more to it. Don't just stop there.
And if personalism is true, which I think it is, then part of what I think that entails is, as human persons, we have this innate orientation towards the good. And the good here is going to be conceived personalistically. That is, we are teleologically ordered towards relationship with other persons. And so I think people do. I've seen lots of people respond really well to the ideas of personalism because it helps grow those seeds they already have, but it also just helps actualize their nature. Like, this is who I was created to be. This is the way of looking at the world that sort of makes most sense of the very orientations of the human heart. And so drawing those out of people through one-on-one conversations and things like that is helpful, I think.
Hi, I'm Jim. I'm glad we got this on film because this is the first time I've ever heard our associated scholar for metaphysics and aesthetics say the word concrete, not once, but twice. My question is kind of extending the more concrete question that you just asked. We started out talking about ecology. Gratitude is one of the virtues and responses we've been talking about here. When I get home, how should I be thinking about setting up my home environment in a way that fosters my response to values in ways that is going to grow my personalist seed, is going to sort of water me so that grows up in me, which will then continue on to the way that I treat others and touch on all these sort of larger systemic issues that we talked about. So, what do you folks do to create your environment so that that tends to happen?
Personalist interior design.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, this is a great new idea.
I think in a very practical way, I mean, my home is going to look a lot different than a lot of people's home because there's a lot more people that live in that home. And there are varying stages in life. But for me, I want to always point them towards what is good and beautiful. And with the personalistic notion, what is good and beautiful is mankind. And so for them to see that there are all different kind of facets and different understandings of the person in the world. So one of those ways in which I practice that in my home is that there are all kinds of pictures of saints in our home. And saints of all different colors and creeds. There's modern pictures of saints. There's a great artist who took pictures of saints and made them into modern day characters, what that saint would look like if they lived today. And so being able to orient my children to know that when one of our sons, he's named after, his middle name is Thomas, after Thomas Aquinas. And so above his bed hangs a picture of Thomas Aquinas. And so when people come into our home, and they're very eager to show them, all of you are welcome. When they come into our home, they always take them into the room and go, well, this is Thomas Aquinas. And this is John Paul II, and this is St. Augustine, and these are all the saints that we are named after. And so there are all these pictures of different people, and for me to make them saints, it shows them that these are very ordinary people, but they're also people that have decided to live their lives in such a way that their self-gift actualized who they were to then become gift to the world. And so for us, that's probably the most real way in my home that we organize it. So.
Yeah, we've done much the same thing in our house. Lots of pictures of saints. So when you come into our living room, the focal point of the living room is the family altar. above which there are ever proliferating number of icons. We've sort of exhausted the space above the altar. Now hopefully it's going to spill out down the walls, and there are others elsewhere in the room. And then also trying to have beautiful things, like prints of beautiful paintings or beautiful original artworks, if we can have them. You know, having those on the walls, having that beauty, I think, is also really important for fostering these sorts of attitudes. And then also, like, being very conscious about the gardens and so forth around the house. But then also what I want to add to this is Pope Francis has this line he repeats again and again, and he gets it from Romano Guardini, who I think got it from Henri Bergson, that time is greater than space.
Yes.
And so the way in which you structure your home, not just spatially, but temporally, right? Like thinking about the course of the day as a liturgy. Susanna and I have been inspired to greater or lesser extents at various points throughout our marriage by the rule of St. Benedict, and thinking about, you know, having time for various sorts of work, having time for silent prayer. When the kids were younger, we had the little silence in the afternoon, which monks have, this period of silence in the afternoon, making sure that we try to pray the liturgy of the hours, at least one of the hours together as a family. So sort of structuring your day as much as possible, and different people in different states of life will do this more or less, be able to do this more or less, but structuring your day in a way that regularly returns you to a value perception.
The other thing that I wanted to say too, as part of our home, there's pictures of my family. I mean, there's pictures of each of the kids and us, and there's one picture that's my favorite of me rolling my eyes as everyone else is having a great time, because my daughter kept trying to tackle the photographer. And literally it's me like this, and my husband looking very GQ. And so it's like the quintessential photo of our family in still time. But the other thing that we have in our home is that my kids love to draw. I think a lot of kids just love to draw. And what they've drawn might not make any sense to me, but they think it's beautiful. And so there are pictures all over the house that they have drawn. And I remember a young woman coming into my home once, and she said, "It's really beautiful that you let your kids hang their drawings. My family never let me do that." And so it's just a beautiful way for them to make their space their own, and for me to affirm that what they're giving into the world is worthy of everyone seeing it. And so they're so proud of it, and it's just a way to continue to practice that gratitude and reverence for them.
I like this liturgical idea. I mean, that's one thing I find very important. And none of these, I think, are like canonically personalist answers or anything. So I think we're all just giving you our personal answers. But I mean, I try to have spaces for things. If I don't have a space for it, it's not going to happen, right? And I need to have a reading chair, like the chair that I do my leisure reading in, which is different than my work reading chair. I have a lot of chairs in my house, but it you know, it's like it's there when you need it, because you know it's important to make these spaces, right? And then I've got to have a clean shop. I can't work in a messy shop. So when I'm finishing a project, like part of finishing the project is cleaning the space. Like if the project's not done until all the tools are put away, so that I can and sharpened and ready, you know, like that's part of it. So that, and then I would also say I'm personally a big fan of the arts and crafts movement, and what William Morris, Eric Gill, these sort of authors are worth looking at here. They have a lot of thoughts about like making your space beautiful, and they were writing around the advent of industrialized furniture production, and which they really did not like. And I would say avoid it. You know, I mean, get handmade things that are beautiful. You can find them at auction, Goodwills, whatever. And I will say, I do have, like, there's a mystery to them and a history to them. And I have a gratitude towards them. Like, I have this chest, this old English carved chest. It cost very little. Like, I got it at an auction house. It would cost less than something you'd buy at IKEA. But it's all hand carved. And I don't know who carved it. But some person did that, right? And it has this personal character to it. And someday it will be someone else's. And it just... And I walk by and I marvel at these things, and so I try to fill my space with these things. You notice the difference, you know, with the hand-carved, hand-made things versus the machine-produced things, and, you know, I mean, as one can, you know, I mean, I know you can't always do, everything, but I think that makes a huge difference in my daily life. So that's our personalist interior design company. We maybe have time for one more question if we have one. Ready? Yeah, okay. Maybe two if Amanda's already promised you.
We have a couple online questions.
Oh, good.
We have a question about what your perspective is on cost-sharing programs and the impersonal nature of current welfare programs. Currently in health cost-sharing programs such as Solidarity Share, they help facilitate a more personal connection to healthcare. Catherine says that this is because her understanding that you can specifically send prayer notes to a particular person. Do you have any thoughts on this?
That sounds lovely. I don't know a whole lot about it, though. Do you all?
No, and I think we kind of might have probably hit on it a little bit, just wanting to make sure that there is an interpersonal notion when you are practicing charity, and it sounds like that's happening. If you're able to write a note, if you're able to do those kind of things, it's a really beautiful.
Yeah, I do think
move forward.
There has been a gradual eroding failure of like civil society and subsidiarity, where we've lost these intermediary institutions, and it's good to see them coming back, right? There were problems, certainly limitations, absolutely, with organizations that like the IOOF and groups like this that pooled together to take care of one another. I mean, the Knights of Columbus have this origin as well, and like that really is a more personal way to help people, and when we can't, you go from the family then to the church and the community and then all the way up to the state. You shouldn't really have to get to the state. Like something's gone wrong if you get to the state, and so if we can and are doing things to bring that care closer to the people who need it, I think that's great. But I don't know a whole lot about it particularly.
And I think also just sort of maybe it's a little more general or abstract point, but we talked yesterday, I guess it was, about technologies and the way in which they screen us from one another. And one technology, maybe we don't normally think of it as a technology, is a bureaucracy, right? A sort of procedurally organized organization, right? And the various sorts of, sort of impersonal ways in which we're going to go about bringing about certain results. Bureaucracies are necessary to do like any of these sorts of things at scale. But I think it's important that with any technology, including bureaucracies, they be in the service of persons, right? So a place like the Knights of Columbus, I don't know how well they've actually accomplished this, but the Knights of Columbus is at least a place in which the actual contact where people are being cared for is interpersonal, and the whole bureaucracy of the insurance company is at the service of those interpersonal relations. So that seems crucial.
I have another question from an online participant. This can be in the context of family or in just society. When a caretaker takes on a heavy burden to care for someone with many needs, how do you avoid resentment?
So I think it's the same thought with burnout, is making sure that your desire for humanization happens for the person that you're caring for, and then also happens for yourself. Because what will happen when there's a lot to do, or you feel like this has become overly burdensome, is that now you no longer think of them as a person. Now they've become a task. They've become a to-do list. And then we do it to ourselves too. Like I have to care for this person because I've been entrusted to them, but I'm not going to care for myself. So there's dehumanization that happens to the person that you're caring for and to you yourself as the caregiver. So being able to make sure that you're giving yourself space for that recharge is very important, because it reorients you to who is human, and that's something that we have to keep a hold of when we're doing great moves of care.
Yeah, I think a lot of this relates back to what Pat Lee was saying a couple days ago about a sort of utilitarian, maximize goodness mindset. If that's your mindset, you're going to get resentment, you're going to burn out. Whereas a value-oriented mindset is going to be much less likely to lead to that.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Matt. You had mentioned the cosmic liturgy as you were like out in nature earlier, and I wanted to kind of bring that down a little bit and just ask, is that, when you concretize that, is that basically the same as when I walk down a road and cows are blocking the road, I grew up around farms, and the cows are super spooked because I'm just walking down the road and they run, and I say, man, Lord, you made some dumb animals. Thank you for their dumbness and goofiness. Is that roughly equivalent?
Yeah, I think that's a concrete expression of liturgical attitude. Yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Michaela. I'm sorry, I'm still reveling in that. I was wondering, what would be a good way to explain what personalism is, simply to like someone who's secular, doesn't have any of like our education in philosophy or etc. Like, what are some concepts that would be easy for them to connect to, words that would mean something for them, but that would kind of get to the heart of personalism?
I'll let you take this, but we will also have a concluding panel where we can ask more general questions on personalism as well.
Yeah, just real briefly, because I know we need to move to that final panel soon. Like I was saying to the previous question, I don't think it's a good idea to start with concepts, big concepts. I think it's a good idea to start with what the person already thinks and believes. So sort of find those seeds of personalism that are there in their concern for justice and their concern for rights, their concern for human dignity, right? If they're a social justice activist, as many people are nowadays, or at least take themselves to be a social justice activist, like, what is it that they care about? It's probably going to be something having to do with the dignity of persons. It might be skewed in various ways, it might be immoral in various ways, but there's going to be some care for persons that's there. And then sort of drawing that out, helping them see why, and helping them to articulate for themselves, why do they care about persons, right? Why do these things keep them up at night? That, I think, is the best way to introduce non-philosophers to personalism.
And letting that person know that they are unrepeatable, and just drawing them into the notion that who you are, there is no one else in the world like you, that the moment that you were conceived, that the entire world was changed. And really trying to drive that home in our work and everything that we do is a great place to start with personalism.
I think it's hard to top that. Thank you, everyone.